Act 2. Hooves on the Ground. Chapter 9. The Art of Subtlety.
You will be sent 5 months before the cataclysm. It is important, Scootaloo, that you get a lay of the land in advance of the destruction of Equestria, so that in the present we may both compile all of the things that you have observed, so as to determine what was the cause of the horror.
But why bind me to Miss Cheerily? The last pony asked. She stepped back and watched as her purple dragon companion moved several large bits of equipment with his iron-wrought limbs, making an open space across the floor of his cavernous laboratory. She's sweet and all, but wouldn't she be the least likely pony in Equestria's past to have an answer to what happened? Why not just bind me to Princess Celestia, so that I could just talk directly with her and get this whole thing over with?
That would be an extremely solid solution.
Spike nodded, his violet neck pendant dangling.
If it was possible.
He brushed the rocky floor clean with a green-crested tail, before producing a crystal vial of ashes from a nearby cabinet. Using nimble fingers, he started drawing an alchemic circle across the floor with the powdery dust.
Alas, though contacting Princess Celestia would certainly give us the best possible perspective on the eve of the cataclysm, I cannot send you back in time bound directly to her soul.
Why not? Scootaloo made a face, as she watched the mystical designs take form under the dragon's careful motions. I thought you said that the ponies you could buy me to were friends of yours. Didn't you brush tails with the princess on multiple occasions while she mentored Twilight Sparkle back in Canterlot?
To think of Princess Celestia as a friend of mine is most humbling,
He said with a smile.
And such is undeniably true. But no matter how attuned I may have been with the royal alicorns of Canterlot, I would be a fool to think that I could in any way target the essence of a goddess's soul. Even if I was the most powerful dragon that had ever lived, I would never be capable of binding any time-traveling creature to the life force of Celestia or Luna. Once immortal, always immortal. 300 years of experience is but a pin drop, you see.
If you say so, Scootaloo mumbled. She gulped and glanced briefly about the colorful instruments and chemicals that sparkled across the laboratory, feeling suddenly like she was stumbling before the plank of a very intimidating launchpad aimed into a sea of green fire. But still, Miss Cheerily? How do I expect a lone schoolteacher to help us out after I tell her her whole world is gonna die?
You don't.
Scootaloo's scarlet eyes bugged. I don't?
Scootaloo, you are going back to be an observer. It is you who must find out about the future, not them.
You're joking! Her face contorted as she backtrotted in disbelief. Spike, if you and I are gonna be serious about unearthing the mystery of the cataclysm, we're gonna need all the help we can get. And I can't do diddly squat if I pretend like nothing's gonna happen to all the ponies whom I meet in the past.
The fact that you know what is going to happen is certainly sufficient enough for you to accomplish your tasks, child,
Spike said, finishing the circle and sprinkling the remaining dust back into his crystal vial.
But where your knowledge is an asset to you, I am afraid it will only be a deterrent to them. If you arrive back in time as the harbinger of doom, you will not scrounge up information. You will only arouse panic.
But maybe that's the key. Scootaloo's eyes glistened as she leaned up towards him. Spike, if we tell everyone what happens, maybe we could...
Stop something that will transpire anyways, as is in accordance with the immutable flow of time?
He stared deeply at her, his eyes hanging like cold emeralds. She deflated, scruffing at the rocky floor with a wayward hoof. But something has to be done, Spike. This just doesn't feel right. There's so much pretense about what you're sending me in the past to do. You know I've done a lot of harsh things in the wasteland to survive. I've lied to many soulless creatures, and I've cheated several mercenaries who I knew would only swindle me in the future. She paused for a moment, gulping. Her scarlet eyes danced left and right, then calmed as she further said, But in a land like Equestria, all I will find are ponies. And to me, any pony is a friend. I don't think I can lie to friends like I've attempted to manipulate everything else within a leg's distance of these wastes.
I'm sending you back in the past, Scootaloo, because I know that you are resourceful, intelligent, and brave. But more than any of those attributes, there is one quality that you must master in order to succeed in your newest endeavor.
And what's that, pray tell?
Subtlety.
She frowned at him. I don't do subtle.
What a surprise.
He half chuckled, his iron nostrils fuming playfully.
Well, I suggest you stretch yourself in that area, old friend, because where you are about to go, subtlety is richer than oxygen. Once you've landed, I suggest that you take many long, even breaths, before you even so much as talk to a single pony.
Just how long am I going to be there? Scootaloo asked with a brief bout of nervousness.
I've stored up enough green flame in my enchanted fire glands to send you back for a period of 5 to 7 days.
Spike counted his clawed fingers for emphasis.
To stay anchored in the past longer than a week is beyond the range that I am capable of giving you. Also, remember, because you'll be bound to Cheerilee, it is important that you do not leave more than 40 meters from her position, or else your soul will no longer be anchored to its source in the past.
What happens either way? Scootaloo blinked. If the 7 days run out, or I walk out of bounds of the teacher... She gulped. Do I die in a puff of smoke?
If you call speedily returning to this laboratory in the presence of my wholesome company deadly, then certainly.
The elder dragon chuckled.
Fear not, Scootaloo. As you are not truly your physical self in the past, you will be oblivious to pain, hunger, and even exhaustion. Your manifested soul self will be akin to a projection of your essence. The only ones who will think that you are real are those in the past who observe you. So try and make a good first impression.
But what if they recognize me? She asked, suddenly wincing.
I seriously doubt you'll have to worry about that.
Spike stated matter-of-factly.
You'll hardly resemble your past self. For that matter, you'll hardly resemble any pony at all.
His face glinted at her in a sudden sheen of melancholy.
And in speaking of your past self...
The mare stared up at him forlornly. He said,
Though we both know that bumping into your foolish copy will hardly have an effect on the immutable passage of time, I would still advise against it. Meeting a doppelganger from the past is existentially exhausting, to say the least.
I'll take your word for it, she said in a dry voice. I really have no intention of doing that anyways. She murmured, turned, and trotted firmly into the circle. Now send my butt back already.
Very well.
He nodded his green-crested head, stepped around her, and perched on a mound of gemstones flanking the alchemic circles.
Remember, Scootaloo, subtlety.
He gestured as his shadow rested over her.
Subtlety is the key to success.
Yeah, I get the picture.
And patience, Scootaloo. If you expect to be there as long as my flames permit, then you will make no progress by rushing things. Once you've arrived back in time, try not to make any harsh decisions. Be calm, be serene, be friendly, or just be silent if you wish. Most of all, watch, listen, observe. And once you've made contact with Cheerilee or any of the other acquaintances, be discreet with them. Be courteous, and after you have won their trust, then and only then may you attempt to proceed higher among the equestrian strata, and hopefully even contact Princess Celestia herself. You will do well expecting this to be a gradual, systematic, and even relaxing process. Who knows? Perhaps you may even enjoy yourself.
He finished with a smile. Enjoy myself? Scootaloo let loose a girlish laugh. She stood boldly in the center of the circles as she balked at him. Now I know you're fooling with me, Spike.
Hardly, child. I do so sincerely wish for our experiment here to succeed, for the sake of Equestria's future. But, more importantly, I hope that you will gain from this something that will bring you both peace and contentment.
Spike, I'll worry about closure when I'm dead. He nodded.
I was afraid of that.
He pointed.
Close your eyes, Scootaloo.
She squinted at him with brief perplexity, but ultimately obeyed. With a shuddering breath, she allowed the world to turn dark around her. Her coat's hair stood on end as she felt the sterile cold air around her, expecting all of it to start burning off her body in a simple flash of a green torch. Just as she began settling her trembling limbs, she sensed a dim aura spilling through her eyelids. A high-pitched vibration filled the static air. Her heart started racing, and she clenched her teeth tight, preparing to plummet at any moment. Instead, she was struck with a far more alien sensation, a wave of frosted powder billowing over her figure. Scootaloo couldn't help it. Her scarlet eyes flew open, and she gasped to see a layer of dust blanketing her mane, forehead, and hooves. The coarse gray filament matched the material that formed the now green glowing alchemic circles beneath her. Jaw quivering, she gazed up at Spike. Whose ashes are these? His body was a somber shadow with cold marble eyelids.
Cheerilee's,
he said, closing a jar once more in his grasp. What? She stammered.
I'm sorry, Scootaloo. It's the only way.
He leaned forward, opened his mouth, and covered half the room in vaporous emerald light. Spike! She started, but suddenly saw his image slide away from her at 2 million kilometers per second. She was screaming backwards down a quivering snakeskin of hundreds of refracting lenses, eating away at her flesh and bone with the acidic clouds of forest green chaos. The ivory band of Cheerilee's powdery ashes wafted off her and coalesced around the Pegasus's echoing heartbeat like a porcelain cocoon. And at the bottom of the typhoonesque collapse, the ashen egg broke away and deposited a grunting pony into a warm basin of color, smells, and life. "Wait!" Scootaloo shouted, but her voice wasn't hers. "Oh boy." Her eyes flickered under the shiver of a gasp, then squinted, for a very foreign beacon of light was once more slicing its way up an alien sky, cradling her in its solar arms. Hissing, sputtering for breath, the mare wobbled to her knees and stared up into the sun, a thing she hadn't done in so many years that she briefly forgot what a danger it was. And yet, so long as she stared, her eyes weren't burning, as if they were made of queerly stronger stuff than granite. She needed focus, so Scootaloo finally ripped her gaze from the sun and looked around her. She saw the porcelain southern mountains, the crystal blue lake at the base of the hills, the billowing edges of everfree forest, and coasting over the edge of a warm and sizzling eastern horizon, the first of many gold-thatched rooftops that prophesied the edge of downtown Ponyville. "Oh, Spike," she murmured in a whimpering voice, once more a breath that sounded alien to her, but she hardly cared. "You didn't send me into the past. You sent me into heaven." She bit her lip and tried to steady herself as the emotions flooded back in a single, overwhelming heap. Scootaloo felt her lungs quivering, her panting breaths coming out in tiny, hyperventilating chirps. She tried to remember something the purple dragon had taught her, about taking steady breaths, about being serene, about blending in with her surroundings. But as her eyes watered and her limbs quivered, she couldn't take into account any of those things, instead searching, gazing, piercing the sky for the one thing. "The rainbow. Where is it?" She looked once more above the crystalline reflective surface of the lake. The prismatic band was gone. There was a lot less fog, and decidedly more heat than the last time Spike sent her to this spot. It took a few dumbfounded moments for Scootaloo to realize why. This was the afternoon, not the morning. In 2.5 decades of wasteland grayscape, the mare had forgotten that there used to be a time cycle within the span of a day. And yet, her heart rejoiced at the revelation. It was like riding her scooter again. Her scooter. Her childhood. Equestria. Praise Celestia. It's all so magnificent. The voice inside her half sobbed. She limped forward on stone legs, nearly drooling. Now, where's that dang schoolhouse? I'm liable to kiss Cheerilee when I see— Yak! She shrieked, and she suddenly slid down a long incline of red wooden shingles. Uncontrollably, she smacked into the bell tower of the schoolhouse's roof, toppled over twice, and fell like an anvil off the side of the building where she had materialized back in time. She plunged into a wide drinking trough standing aside the playground, snout first. Scootaloo tossed herself out with a sputtering spray of water and plopped hard into the dirt, gasping for air. Fully soaked, she instinctually shook her coat into a flimsy facsimile of dryness, and shuddered. What did Spike say about taking deep breaths? Oh yeah, duh. She tilted her snout up to glance across the playground, and in so doing she peripherally noticed a wet mat of mane hair curling over the side of her neck. Blinking, she raised a hoof to push some of the threads into closer view. What she saw was a soaked cluster of black threads, with the faintest hint of amber. Her face scrunched as she glanced every which way, then ultimately turned to face the water trough. Trotting over and peering in, she watched as the liquid surface settled from her brief collapse into the basin. As the water smoothed, the reflection of a strange Pegasus came into being, a young mare with a rusted copper coat, like the color of earth and clay, from her hooves to her feathery wings, shining far brighter and richer than the dull brown coat of future Scootaloo, or even the orange sheen she had as a foal. And instead of violet or aged scarlet eyes, they reflected twin marbles of bright amber, as if sculpted out of the vein of a tree in spring. Finally, her mane flowed with an elegant sheen of black silken threads, with a thin streak of amber running down the middle that matched the color of her blinking eyes. Well, hello there, she murmured with drunken amusement into the bobbing reflection. Who are you? She finally took a moment to recognize the strange voice coming out of her. Just like everything else about her projection, the voice was different. Younger and deeper than her future self, but still laced with the same inflection and murmuring qualities of her experienced soul. Scootaloo judged that, whoever she looked like, she appeared no older than 22 winters, which for that point in the timeline placed her about the same age as Fluttershy, Twilight Sparkle, and many of the older ponies whom Scootaloo looked up to in her youthful days. It all seemed strangely, even fatefully appropriate. All fears about any pony recognizing her flew out an invisible window. If she could somehow come back to the future looking and sounding like this, she was certain even Spike himself would scratch his scaled head in confusion. The transplanted mare ran a hoof one more time through her obsidian threads, before a sudden movement in front of her grabbed her attention. Glancing up, she realized that she was standing in front of a window to the schoolhouse. A veil of curtains hung over the pane, but there was a ruby shadow shuffling from within, followed by a muffled feminine voice and several young murmurs replying in cadence. 25 years in the past, school was in session. Skulu's heart skipped a beat. She glanced at the warm landscape buzzing around her. She smelled the crisp spring air, and she heard the singing of the birds and the murmur of the cicadas. Spike's Ponyvillian terrarium was a pathetic pin drop in the great, throbbing basin of life that was now encompassing her, hugging her. She had every reason to stand right there and soak in that moment forever. She didn't. Can anyone tell me what a harpy is? Several hooves lifted into the classroom air with mixed levels of enthusiasm. An adult mare sporting a joyful mane of fuchsia looked over her students and picked out the most eager of the bunch. Yes, Snips. Do you know? Oh, a harpy is like the cutie mark on the lady who owns the music store downtown. A chorus of giggles lit the room. The rotund little unicorn in the center of the laughing circle sunk shamefully into his desk seat. The ruby-coated schoolteacher chuckled sweetly. No, Snips. And for clarification, Miss Heartstring's cutie mark is aptly named a lyre, not a harp. Cheerily cleared her throat and smiled at all of the students. A harpy is a sentient creature that resembles a falcon. It has the body of a bird of prey, including sharp talons, and broad wings, but its upper half consists of the head of a simian, only with a pronounced beak. She trotted over towards the picture stand and unveiled a poster of the avian monstrosity. Half of the class gasped, the other half murmured oohs, and stared forward with tilting interest. Over 90% of their population is female. They feast mostly on the meat of rodents and smaller birds, and they live in nocturnal clusters along the bluffs of the eastern ocean shore. Ew. A pink-coated pony with a tiara for a cutie mark made a retching face. Like, who in their right mind would actually eat meat? Yeah, that's so gross. A silver-filling mirrored her friend's nauseated voice from one desk over. They might as well just chomp on each other. An understandable reaction, Cheerily nodded. Eating meat is very taboo in pony culture, but as a matter of fact, there are many sentient creatures in Equestria who eat meat on a regular basis, such as our allies, the griffins in the northwest, and they live out their lives in relative peace and tranquility. The teacher motioned once more to the beastly picture propped before the class. Even many harpies today live a pacifist existence, but that hasn't always been the case. Equestria used to be swarming with violent flocks of creatures, ruthless pirates who ravaged the countryside during the Chaos Wars that preceded the Second Age, and... Cheerily's gaze glanced up at the sound of clopping hooves, and her green eyes twitched. Something of a grimace graced her figure, but she suppressed it at the last second, clearing her throat and smiling presently in the company of the little foals. Why, hello there. Is there, something we can help you with? The faces of 36 foals twisted confusedly. With the creaking of wooden desk seats, they gradually turned around to see a curious sight in the back of the classroom. A young adult Pegasus stood, her long black mane a wet and tangled mess, her copper coat dripping a puddle of moisture over the floorboards. The open doors basked her in a platinum aura, like a golden visitor from beyond. Nobody knew any wiser. Scootaloo gulped, dumbly gazing at the 40-odd young sets of eyes blinking up at her, the first time in years that any ponies had ever stared at her. Ever. Her heart was beating so hard, she had a difficult time standing. To keep her legs from wobbling, she stepped a hoof forward, but jumped the first moment she saw the foal's bright eyes moving along with her. Clenching her teeth, she leaned back into a row of bookshelves and gulped, exhaling a wheeze. Hi there. Hello. Hiya. Hello. Hello, ma'am. Hey there. Hi. Oh boy. Scootaloo shuddered, a sore lump forming in her throat. So many eyes. So many ashes. A wave of gray overcast washed over her vision until her last blink ended, and the schoolroom was staring at her once again, the many young faces scrunching in confusion. There was not a single frightened expression amongst them. The last pony suddenly felt like hugging every individual one. Did you have a delivery of school supplies to make? Cheerily's chirpy voice rocked Scootaloo back onto her hooves. The deposit box is out back. I happen to, be teaching a class at the moment. She cleared her voice and added with a wink. Unless you want to take a seat and learn about the carnivorous habit of harpies. Rows of seats giggled amusedly. No, Scootaloo murmured, trotting slowly around the circumference of the one-room class as many had swiveled innocently to follow her. Sure. I'm a delivery pony. Or something like that. Yes. Her voice deflated under a raspy air of nervous chokes. She coughed, shook her wet black mane a bit drier, and stumbled into a pole bearing the flag of the celestial crest. She winced, jittering, and set the rocking banner still. With a calming breath, she stood back on four hooves. Just passing through, and, who sent you? Cheerily spoke in a suddenly hushed voice that was meant for the two of them alone. She trotted over slightly. Do you have a working permit? Scootaloo turned and instinctively tilted her head up until she realized she had to lower her face to stare cheerily eye to eye. Geez, you're shorter than I remembered. The schoolteacher's green eyes blinked crookedly at that. Suddenly, a filly gasped girlishly in the front row and pointed an excited hoof. Ooh, look at her kitty mark! Wow! That's so awesome! Cool! I've never seen one like that! Pretty! Cheerily seized the moment, her face brightening as she stood aside the visitor's flank. Oh yes, it is a most splendid cutie mark, isn't it? Huh? Scootaloo blinked at the teacher. She glanced back at her hindquarters and did a double take, her amber eyes exploding. Holy manure castles! Emblazoned across her copper coat was an elaborate masterpiece of magical branding. A celestial ring of black and amber sunflowers encircled an ink-dark pair of loops, like a stretched-out figure eight. Judging from its sideways angle, it had to have been some natural version of the infinity symbol, complete with what could be best described as an abstract mimic of the celestial crest. Scootaloo performed a few dashing glances back and forth from her sudden mark to a flag in the corner of the schoolroom just to be sure, and there was no doubt about it. Well, if that isn't the most awesome thing that ever awesomed. Class, remember our lessons on the cutie mark last month? Can anyone tell me what the crest on her flank means? A few hooves rose up. Cheerily pointed towards the center of the room. Yes, Twist? It means that thief in the royal service of the Canterlot court. Royal service of what now? Scootaloo gave a sweating grimace. Absolutely, Twist. Cheerily grinned, standing boldly next to the immeasurably confused visitor. All ponies born with the crest are lucky enough to become servants in Princess Celestia's court. It means that they get to live out their lives as overseers and watch horses, spreading the sun goddess's influence far and wide, and maintaining order across Equestria. We're very lucky to have this special guest here with us today. The teacher spun and grinned in Scootaloo's face with a sudden foolish giddiness as she hopped in place, whispering, Is this about the request for the field trip to visit the Winnipeg Museum? Scootaloo's copper temples lost grip of a sizable sweat drop. I just wanted to... Most esteemed servant to Her Highness, Princess Celestia. Shirley proudly swept her muzzle towards the classroom, her voice like a sugar-coated megaphone. Why don't you grace the students with what exactly it is you do for our Keeper of the Sun? The copper mare's eyes bulged. She glanced nervously across the rows upon rows of pastel-colored eyes staring felicitously at her. It was a veritable sea of infant lungs holding a giant breath in anticipation of Scootaloo's next charming words. I deliver packages for the Royal Office of, She blinked. Flamestones. She winced, but brightened slightly as the class murmured in awe of her fabrication. What's a flamestone? A sprightly redhead with thick eyeglasses gaped. A flamestone, Scootaloo exhaled, speaking suddenly with natural ease. It's a type of gem that's been enchanted with elemental red flame as a result of severe compression, brought upon by the collapsing chunks of the moon that collided with the face of the equestrian wasteland immediately after the cataclysm. Her face twisted into an endless wince as she swiftly registered the words that had been spat out of her mouth. The class stared prolongedly at her, a mosaic of blank faces. A long-necked unicorn, his brown face scrunched, throated. What's a cataclysm? It means a destructive event that forever changes the face of the earth. Excuse me, class. Cheerily nervously spun around and looked worriedly in Scootaloo's face. Ma'am, is everything all right? No offense, but you don't look or sound too good. Are you feeling ill? Cheerily's green eyes blinked. Ma'am? Scootaloo was staring at the children, face after face, snout after snout, horns and ears and manes, but no hair bows. Where's Applebloom? She murmured in a childish voice. Then, a startled gasp escaped her lips as Scootaloo's amber eyes darted towards the center of the room. She focused on a hauntingly familiar seat that stood empty before her. Where am I today? The Apple family's daughter is homesick for the day. As for you, This is early spring, Scootaloo gulped. Applebloom was out sick with ponypox, she thought out loud. Sweetiebelle was with her parents for the month, and I... She bit her lip. I was hungry. Too friggin' hungry to even walk. Sweet Celestia. Shirley shifted awkwardly, gulping. Ma'am, may I have a word with you in the atrium for a quick moment? They're all gonna die. Scootaloo slurred, her eyes quivering at all of the happy, innocent faces. Every single one of them. She hissed through clenched teeth and tilted her wincing snout ceilingward in a maddening stupor. This building, I've seen it from the clouds. Not one stone is lying on top of one another. Ma'am! Shirley gasped, nervously glancing from the class to the Pegasus and back. She leaned into her, nudging a little. Please, let's take this into the other room. You'll scare the children. At the word scare, Scootaloo's eyes flashed open. Trailing on her lashes were scores of lantern-lit memories, of pale leathery trolls slashing at her through the darkness, of billowing stormfronts that threatened to tear her Zeppelin apart, of lonely nights spent lying in a swaying hammock and reading about the immortal sorrows of a dead princess. A pained breath surfaced at the base of her lungs and came out in the form of a menacing snarl. She had seen the world consumed in fire, and she had ridden the tongues of flame back to this shuddering moment in time. The Holocaust had to end somewhere. I'm sorry, Spike, but screw it. She spun and stared daggers into Shirley's eyes. You need to contact Princess Celestia, now. Me? The ruby-coated teacher wilted backwards. She chuckled nervously. But I'm not the royal servant to the court of Camelot. You're the one qualified to... Will you stop it with this royal servant nonsense? Scootaloo barked, eliciting several foolish gasps from the classroom. She took a few vicious hope steps toward the teacher. The only business I'm here for is to send a message. And it's a message that has to be sent to Princess Celestia, no pony else. And I don't have much time. I can't be expected to leave this classroom now to deliver anything. Shirley frowned. Even if I could contact the princess, this is not a joke. Scootaloo snarled, her voice echoing across the schoolroom as she leered above Shirley. Something horrible is going to happen. Something really bad. Ponies are going to die. Not just some ponies, but every pony. Please, you're making a scene. Dang right I am. Now let's stop beating around the bush and go see the princess. I'm not going to be here forever. Time is of the essence. And girl, you have no idea how true that statement is. I don't know what you're... The End of Ponies! Scootaloo's amber eyes flared as she breathed in desperate heaves. A burning wave of magic that will render all of equine life to ash. You have no idea, no clue what kind of devastation I'm talking about. The sun and the moon, they will be gone, vanished, leaving nothing but endless twilight. Scootaloo's voice stopped, her ears pricking for having heard something like a whimper. She gazed aside and twitched to see the four-eyed redhead cowering behind her desk, her glasses fogged. To her sides and behind her, several more students were trembling, scrunched away from the side of the rambling stranger. There were tears. Tears. No, it's not so bad. I mean, yes, it is bad. Scootaloo smiled crookedly, trying to straighten her frazzled black threads as she trotted towards the desks. The entire classroom shrugged away from her in one fluid jolt. She stopped in her tracks and gulped. Okay, so it is terrible, but most of you are still young, so you should be enjoying all of this while it lasts. Every pony dies at some point, but it's just the nature of... A few more confused sobs filled the air. Scootaloo snarled. Look, it's not like I brought the end of the world, okay? So don't be scared of me. They still trembled and shivered. She barked. I said don't be scared! The foals winced, covering their eyes to avoid her snarling gaze. She blinked at them, starting to hyperventilate as the impossible situation crumbled more and more. There was a whispering sound towards the rear of the room. She spun around to see that Shirley was no longer by her side. Instead, the jittery teacher was squatting beside the long-necked unicorn, murmuring into the colt's ear. Snails, go to the corner of 5th and McCracken and fetch Officer Silvertrot. Yes, Miss Shirley. The colt nervously jolted, bounded out of his seat, and galloped out of the school entrance. What are you doing? Scootaloo blinked wildly. Shirley motioned towards the doors, trotting over to shut them. Why don't you just calm down and have a seat? No! Scootaloo rushed over, forcing Shirley to jump. Don't leave! Don't... She nudged Shirley away from the door and smiled in a frazzled mess. Good. Don't leave me. If you walk too far away, I might vanish and go back into the future. The future? Shirley gazed at her, dumbfounded. It's a long story, but that's not for you to hear. Scootaloo patted the teacher's wincing shoulder. That's for the princess. She'll understand. Or at least, she'd better. She can't prevent the world from ending, but maybe she can help me figure out how it happened. She grunted at the sound of several sobs and flashed a frown over her shoulder. Stop crying! It'll all be fine. I just gotta talk to the princess. Maybe you should just sit down while I prepare a letter. Not a stupid letter, girl. I need to talk to Princess Celestia personally, Scootaloo exclaimed. She suddenly started a sight over Cheerily's flank. Through a sunny window, she could see a unicorn goat galloping back with 2 uniformed adult ponies in tow. You fetched the police on me? I... Cheerily shivered, staring forlornly at the distraught classroom and then back at the raving Pegasus. Please, just try to stay calm, ma'am. No, that's good, Scootaloo beamed, clasping Cheerily's wide-eyed face with a pair of hooves. Go on and call the police. Fetch the royal guard while you're at it. I need Princess Celestia's attention. She's gotta know one way or another. Ugh, oh goddess, this sunlight feels so good. She briefly panted as she gazed out the window to happily watch the arrival of the police. It's like I'm on fire, but in a good way. I wonder if I'll see the sunset. It's been ages since I've seen a sunset. The world is so cold and dead and lifeless. I've forgotten just how... She spat over her shoulder again. Stop crying already! Don't confirm all the crap Gil has ever said. I thought ponies were stronger than this. I gotta, Miss Cheerily. Snails panted suddenly from the back of the room. He bowed out of the way as 2 tall stallions marched in, gazing sternly in Scootaloo's direction. Ma'am, is there a problem? Stallions! Ha-ha! Scootaloo guffawed and clapped her hooves, wide-eyed. Dang it to blazes, where were you after I hit puberty? She cleared her throat, straightened her lips, and strongly orated. I need to see Princess Celestia right away. One uniformed pony raised his eyebrow. Is that a fact? Absolutely. I don't care if you need to arrest me or whatever. Just take me to her. This can't wait. And what is it exactly that can't wait, ma'am? The 2 officers marched towards her. She eyed them warily, her wings flexing. How many times am I going to have to spell it out, and to how many ponies? She furrowed her brow. 5 months from now, the world is going to end in fire. Every living pony is going to turn to ash, while the sun and moon die. I need to talk to the princess and figure out how this is going to happen so I can undo the damage that will be done. The officers glanced at the wilting side of the classroom, then back at the Pegasus. How about you just come with us? Yes, fine, take me. But as long as we talk to the princess. Thank you, officers, Cheerily murmured, backtrotting towards the classroom. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't... Scootaloo gasped at her. Don't you stay here! She shouted and leaped towards her. We have to stay together, or else I'll be zapped forward in time. She jolted as the 2 police ponies suddenly grabbed her by the flank and tail. Let go! Easy now. The stallions struggled and applied their weight. You've done quite enough. Didn't you hear me? Scootaloo wrangled her wings under one of the colts with veteran tenacity and easily flung the surprised officer across the room so they crashed into a filing cabinet, forcing the room full of foals to shriek. We have to stay together. I'm not even going to pretend to argue with you. Ma'am, if you don't calm down, we'll be forced to... This world is gonna die in flames, and you're telling me to calm down? Scootaloo snarled and lowered on her haunches, her copper wings poised to spring while the 2 officers stumbled back under their hooves and encircled her. I'm not gonna ask this again, you good-for-nothing punks. Take me to the princess, or I will... It's all right. Cheerily suddenly ran in the officer's way, blocking the space between them and the menacing Pegasus. Please, it's okay. There's no need for a struggle. She gulped. I'll go with her to see the princess. She turned from the blinking stallions and smiled gently at Scootaloo. Her coat was a ruby glaze of cold sweat. We're not going to be separated, okay? Just stick with me. We'll go see the princess together. Scootaloo breathed easier. She stood up straight and rode the cresting descent of adrenaline in her bloodstream. Whew, that's more like it. Looks like at least one pony equestria gives a crap about the future. She trotted towards the schoolhouse entrance, pausing to look back and make sure Cheerily was walking with her as well. She smiled as the teacher strolled up. I'm so sorry to be a bother, but you gotta understand how important this is. Oh, absolutely, Cheerily grinned back. You've obviously been through an awful lot, and it's so very noble of you to give us this warning. I'm sure Princess Celestia will be in your debt, not to mention all of Ponyville. I'm not doing this for the glory or the fame. I just want to find a way to make the world sunny again. You like sunsets, don't you? Indubitably, Cheerily nodded, briefly glancing back and squinting at the 2 colts. The officers followed as the 4 of them marched away from the schoolyard and towards the fringes of Ponyville. If you can follow me, ma'am, I know a place where you can send a telegram to Princess Celestia. I thought I friggin' told you. I need to speak to her face to face. Oh, of course. But the telegrams are sent by Pegasi, like you. This will be the fastest way we can get her to come see us. Oh, well, that's just fine. Yes, just fine. Ah, God, this grass is so amazing. Isn't the grass amazing? There's no grass in the future, you know. And the birds? Nope, all dead. Isn't it a shame? Though to be frank, I never cared much for chickens. But that's a long story that I won't get into. Uh-huh. Shirley nodded as the two ducked into the rear door of a 2-story cinder-block building on the edge of Ponyville. The sound of theirs and the officers' hooves echoed across brightly lit corridors as they took a left, a right, and descended a series of steps into a dimly lit basement. You certainly miss a lot of things where you come from. Pfft, I'm just rambling off a list of random crud that I see. Do forgive me. Scootaloo chuckled against her shadows on the walls. It's just been so long since I talked to another pony. What with all you being dead and stuff. I'm amazed that I didn't take to talking to myself after so many years of being alone. I used to always think that's what bums did. But wait, did Ponyville have bums? I must be getting my memories mixed up with that one summer I spent at a foster home in Manhattan. Boy did I laugh when I found the place flooded with seawater and harpy turds after the cataclysm. Wow, that does sound funny. Cheerily droned, her smile a plastic one as she finally stopped in her tracks, glancing over Scootaloo's shoulders and towards the officers. Pfft, why would you find that funny? Scootaloo smirked, blinked, then glanced stupidly around the basement. There were several barred cells lining the corridor. Wait, where in the hay are we? Suddenly, both stallions gave her a vicious shove. She stumbled, gasping, into one of the jail cells, collapsing onto the floor as the metal barred door was slammed shut behind her. She sputtered, gasped, and clambered up to her hooves. No! No! She ran up and rammed the door with her full weight. The bars clanged and rattled, filling the basement with a thunderous echo. Even the officers jumped back at her unnatural strength, but breathed easier as the doors held. Don't do this! Scootaloo shouted. I'm so close to contacting the princess! If you just allow me to speak to her! She blinked, and her eyes narrowed on the quivering face of Cheerilee. You lied to me, didn't you? Thank you, officers. The ruby-haired schoolteacher finally broke down, collapsing into the forelimbs of one of the uniformed stallions as he gently patted her shoulder. I didn't know what else to do. She was scaring the children. I was afraid she was going to do worse. You did the right thing, Miss Cheerilee, the officer said, settling her trembling form. Bluestone, he motioned towards the other officer. Go and fetch Nurse Redheart. See if she can use her fancy-schmancy degree in psychiatry to sort this poor soul out. Roger, on it. The other trotted away. You think I'm crazy? Scootaloo murmured. She frowned, then snarled, banging against the bars with her copper hooves. Well, maybe there's a reason to be crazy. Did you ever think of that? What if you were the last living pony stuck in a world full of endless destruction and blood? You'd go crazy too. But dang it, I'm trying to do something good here. We can save Equestria. We can figure out why all this death and destruction happened. If you would just let me talk to the princess. You'll talk to someone, all right. The officer nodded towards her, his face emotionless and cool. Now calm down, or Nurse Redheart's going to have to replace these bars with something more padded. He moved cheerily away from the raving Pegasus. You, have a seat, darling. I'll get you something to drink. I heard you sent Officer Haybreeze to watch over your class. Everything's going to be fine. Your kids are okay. How could anyone just walk up to a classroom of foals and just disturb the peace like that? Cheerilee shuddered and sniffled as the two walked towards a couch just around the corner from Scootaloo's vision. In all my years of teaching, nothing like that has ever happened. What could the poor soul have gone through to be so lost? I don't pretend to understand the mind of a pony, Miss Cheerilee. My only job is to keep the peace. The word peace rang through Scootaloo's ears, laced with the distant gasp of Cheerilee's sobbing voice. The breasts mutated into an invisible schoolroom full of frightened, quivering foals, their eyes brimming with tears, their eyes wide and horrified, their eyes staring at her. Why is everyone so easily scared? She slumped down to her haunches and plowed her hooves through her flustered black mane. They have to know. They have to know what's going to happen. She stammered and quivered, rocking back and forth in the center of the dimly lit jail cell. We're all gonna die. I just wanted to tell them all. I just want... She clenched her eyes shut as images of the foals' frightened faces flashed once more across her mind in a spinning kaleidoscope. No. You do not know the horror. Not like I do. Stop crying! Stop it! Stop it! Stop! Suddenly, the cell lit up in a green aura. Scootaloo gasped. For a moment, she thought that one of the police ponies had trotted back with a lantern of some sort in his grasp, but surely an Officer Silvertrot had been seated well beyond sight. Once more, the immense emerald glow flickered, burning from the barren cot to the floorboards to the cinder block foundation of the place. Scootaloo stood up, shivering, and watched as a sea of green flames curtained across the room, billowed around her legs, and wafted over her. There was a sudden rising sensation, like riding the harmony up through a cloud bed, and Scootaloo's copper body burned to brown. Her mane melted down into a tiny violet stubble, and her eyes blinked from amber to scarlet. She was standing numbly in the burnt-out alchemic circles drawn in the stone floor of the cavernous laboratory, under the shadow of a calmly gazing, unamused Spike. The last pony blinked. I'm back? Already? She gazed up at the purple dragon, her face pale. But I thought I was supposed to be in the past for no less than 5 days. He stared at her, his green-crested chin propped on a hand of serrated claws.
I distinctly remember saying that I had stored enough green flame to send you back for a week. However, I did not state that I was indeed going to give you that much.
But why, Spike? Scootaloo stammered. Her natural voice was once again a frail thing aged by time and suffering. I thought you were sending me back to get information. There was a knowing glint in Spike's emerald eyes as the elder dragon murmured.
You said it yourself, Scootaloo. You don't do subtle.
He planted both hands down and bent over to stare deep into her soul.
You didn't follow an ounce of my advice, now did you?
She wilted from his gaze, her eyes wavering like so many images of frightened foals still burned into her vision. Guiltily, she hung her snout towards the dull circles and muttered, How did you know?
Because I know you, Scootaloo.
The noble dragon paced around her and came to a stop at the center of the laboratory. He reached over and rested a gentle hand on her shaved mane.
And though you've learned countless things in your years, read innumerable books, survived hundreds of horrors, outrun packs of bloodthirsty monstrosities, you are still, underneath all of that, the same dashing, bold, courageous, albeit impulsive little foal that nearly ran over fellow Ponyvillians in the road with her scooter.
His lips curved slightly.
Underneath all of your hardened exterior, you are still that spunky little filly that once beat up a pair of colts for making fun of me, even though you didn't know that we were just joking around one rainy afternoon in April. And that little dragon, though honored by the way you tried to defend me, couldn't help but wish that she had thought a little more with her senses, at least as much as she did with her heart.
She gnashed her teeth. She gazed up at him with moist eyes. I told them, Spike.
Told who, Scootaloo?
Miss Cheerily. These 2 police officers. The foals. She shuddered painfully. They all heard me talking about the end of the world. They thought I was rambling. A wince. And I was. Dang it, I was. But... She shivered and buckled.
Don't hold back, child.
Do you really realize what you're asking me to do, Spike? She shouted up at him, a tear or two trickling down her cheeks. You want me to keep this awful truth built up like a raging boiler inside of me, and yet I'm somehow supposed to get these ponies to help me figure out why the world dies? I have to tell someone, Spike. How else am I going to learn anything?
And surely you can share the truth, but you have to do it tactfully,
Spike said, stroking her mane and leaning down so his large snout was even with hers.
Subtlety, Scootaloo. I cannot emphasize it enough. These ponies have not been through all the turmoils and struggles that you have. If you go galloping through the streets screaming that the world is going to end, what else can you expect from them but disbelief or utter shock?
I was standing in the warmth of the sun, Scootaloo hiccuped, wiping her tears away with a trembling hoof. And there was grass, and birds, and the children. Oh, goddess, the children. I scared them, Spike. I shouted at them. She clenched her eyes shut and trembled. I don't know why. It was like...
You were angry at them.
Her eyes flashed open. She gazed sickly up at her old friend. How horrible is that? She breathed. What did they ever do to make me envy them so much?
They died, Scootaloo. All of them died, as you and I will someday die,
he said.
Whatever the disaster, whatever the cataclysm, it is still our greatest commonality. There will always be time for pity and envy, as they are often 2 halves of the same misguided coin. But that doesn't mean you should announce their doom while they're standing right in front of you. Epitaphs are meant to be engraved on pony stones, not on their faces.
She paced over limply towards the lone laboratory table and slumped down against it. She nuzzled her face tirely into a pair of folded hooves. What use is any of that now? She gazed up pathetically at the burnt diagram of the past and future on the cave wall, at the jaded lines plastered to an encircle X with a line. I blew it, Spike. The first trip back in time and I've blown my cover. I've made a mess of everything.
I wouldn't be so certain of that,
he said in a slight smile, shuffling across the room.
Yes, a mess you indeed made, but you've hardly ruined things.
Oh, really? She tilted her gaze up at him, frowning. So terrorizing a classroom full of young children doesn't qualify as ruining things. You've spent way too many centuries inside a mountain, Spike.
Like a good lab assistant, I've done my homework,
the elder dragon remarked as he thumbed his clawed fingers through a shelf of parchments. Finally, he pulled out a rolled-up scroll that resembled a flake of scrap paper in his monstrous palm. Marching back on scaled legs, he knelt down and placed the document before her.
While all things living have died in the hovels of Ponyville, the legacy they left behind remains remarkably intact, including the most inane bits of data that one with enough free time can scrounge up from the ruins of, say, the Ponyvillian Police Department records.
She raised an eyebrow at him. Curiously, she slid the scroll towards herself, unsealed it, and stretched the quarter-century-old document open. Her scarlet eyes danced down the rows of neatly scribbled words, and her optics brightened at the end of the perusal. Her jaw dropped as she murmured, The report talks about a deranged Pegasus that was escorted to the jail cell for immediate psychiatric evaluation, following an incident at Miss Cheerley's schoolhouse. But as soon as the officer sent for the village nurse, the suspect disappeared. She blinked into the stone extremities of the cavernous lair. Spike, that deranged suspect was me.
An apt description, I would imagine.
He chuckled softly. You knew about this? She squinted up at him. He innocently smoothed his green spines back.
I suspected it. It wouldn't be the first occasion that I've witnessed time perform a perfect full circle before my eyes, so it's hardly of any surprise to me. If anything, it should be something of consolation for the two of us.
He pointed with a clawed finger.
Does it say anything about the fate of that certain Pegasus,
Scootaloo glanced once more at the document, her scarlet eyes narrowing. She murmured aloud. Cheerly and several students were interviewed to compile a list of details to describe the suspect, but no matches were found in the immediate search. Within 2 weeks, Sheriff Goldman decided the case did not warrant wanted posters. She made a face. The heck? I thought I traumatized those kids.
Don't be so quick to demonize yourself, child,
Spike said.
If I recall correctly, Cheerly's schoolhouse was no stranger to bizarre incidents. In one winter month alone, the windows had to be replaced on 3 separate occasions from a single wayward postal worker flying far too low for Pegasus standards. You must realize, what made life in Ponyville exciting is far different from what makes existence in the Waste exciting.
He smiled slyly. She gulped, sliding the scroll back towards him. Do you have any more written evidences of my time-traveling self in your library, Spike? He took the scroll, shaking his scaled snout with the dangle of his violet pendant.
Not that I've found, child. But if you ask me, that can only be a marvelous thing.
Why's that?
Because it means you'll be following my advice.
He grinned toothily, shoving the scroll away and closing the cabinet drawers.
And the next time you go to the past, you will try and do things with subtlety.
She blinked, eyes wide. You're sending me back? Right now? Right after I just made a mule out of myself?
Oh, I could very well send you soon.
Spike nodded.
But it won't be so soon in the past.
He marched over towards another cabinet and picked up a lead metal box in his clawed hands.
For the sake of caution, I plan to send you a month after your, Cheerly incident.
So it'll be 4 months before the cataclysm, Scootaloo remarked. Her eyes narrowed knowingly on the purple dragon. You planned this from the beginning, didn't you? Miss Cheerly was a test.
Indeed.
He nodded, shuffling over on iron haunches with the box in his grasp. He placed it down onto the lab table just above Scootaloo.
And where you'll be going next, you'll be facing another test. A test of your tenacity for blending in with the world. A test of your ability to adopt a face and a name, and even a backstory. Because where you'll be going, your strength in finding truth will inevitably go through the crucible of bending it.
Something tells me you're not stressing where you'll be sending me as much as who you'll be sending me to, she muttered, standing up alongside him and glancing briefly at the box. Is this someone else's ashes?
No, Scootaloo. I do not have the ashes for whom we both seek.
You don't? Scootaloo blinked. How come?
Though I may be the master of time travel,
He said as he undid the lock to the lead box and opened it with a rusted creak.
I am anything but the Wasteland's chief scavenger.
He reached into the box and pulled out several necklaces tied to tiny white shards of calcium.
If you are truly committed to this experiment, Scootaloo, and if you are willing to go the lengths required to avoid an incident like what happened with Miss Cheerilee from henceforth, then it will be up to you to find the lasting ingredients.
How come everything's a test with you? She smirked briefly up at him. The last pony then motioned her snout towards the shards dangling in the dragon's grasp. What are these?
Baby dragon teeth, renowned for their sensitivity to enchantment.
Whose dragon teeth? Scootaloo blinked, then rolled her scarlet eyes. Oh, let me guess.
But of course.
He smiled, then melted his expression into a neutral sigh and uttered.
I've stored them centuries ago for such a time that they could be of supreme use, and alas, that moment has come.
He danced the dangling tooth beneath his scaled fingers as they glistened in the purple mana lanterns lining the cavern.
Most of them are attuned to specific souls, each being the soul of a pony who I knew in the past, and who I can anchor your soul self to. With these enchanted teeth, you can find the remains of our former friends among the wastes of Equestria. And once you do...
I'll have their ashes, Scootaloo gulped. The ashes we need to perform the binding. She looked up sadly at the dragon. Spike, why didn't you warn me about Cheerilee's remains before you sent me back? His nostrils fumed somberly.
I suspected it may have made you reticent to take the necessary first step.
You can't protect me forever, Spike.
A truth I acknowledge wholeheartedly.
He said with a nod, then handed her a single dragon's tooth on an orange string.
Which is why I believe you are completely and fully ready for performing this search, as it will prepare you for the next chronal leap at Hoof.
She hung the orange-tinted tooth before her eyes, squinting at it. How do you know it will work with me? The tooth, that is.
The same way I'm able to send you into the past beyond the cataclysm while I myself cannot go that far.
He said with a faint, knowing smirk.
The soul essence of ponies is the heart of the enchantment. The dragon tooth will be able to take you straight to the target's remains, while it will be completely dull to me, even if the fang itself came from my whelpish body.
She stared intently at the tooth, sweating. I'm not sensing a thing, Spike.
Shh.
He exhaled calmly.
Relax, child. Do not stress. Only feel.
She took a deep breath. She held the dangling tooth close to her heart and closed her eyes. Through solid inhales, she tried to form a picture in her mind. What she got instead was a scent. The fragrance of dry barn hay, of rich soil and dirt, of rusted plows and wooden yokes, and rows upon rows of delicious red fruit. And then a panorama of luscious green trees flickered through her shut eyelids. And when she snapped her scarlet optics open, they were dilating under the persistent weight of truth. Applejack.